The late afternoon sun cast a warm, golden light across the cul-de-sac as Elena Reyes turned her car onto Sycamore Lane. The neighborhood was quiet and tidy, too tidy, in fact. Every lawn was trimmed to identical lengths, every mailbox polished to a uniform shine. The kind of place where people smiled at you, while secretly cataloging how long your trash bins sat at the curb. Still, she had fallen in love with the place the moment she saw it. After 2 decades on the bench, after years of long nights in chambers and endless hearings, she wanted peace. The colonial house at the end of the street, with its wraparound porch and sprawling oak tree, promised exactly that. She parked in the driveway and stepped out, feeling the crunch of gravel under her heels. The air smelled faintly of jasmine from the neighbor's garden. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to relax. She had no docket to review, no lawyers to scold, no witnesses to interrogate. Just silence. She opened the trunk, pulling out a box labeled Books Office. Her fingers brushed the worn leather cover of her father's law dictionary, the one that had sat on her desk since her first day as a judge. She smiled faintly, tucking it under her arm. "Excuse me." The voice was sharp enough to slice through her calm. Elena turned. A woman in her mid-50s was striding toward her, wearing oversized sunglasses, a lemon-yellow blouse, and an expression that could curdle milk. 2 men followed her like loyal footmen, both wearing matching polos embroidered with the words Sycamore Estates HOA. The woman's clipboard bounced against her hip with each self-important step. "Can I help you?" Elena asked politely. "Yes, you can," the woman replied, not bothering to smile. "You can move your car immediately." Elena blinked, thrown by the abruptness. "I'm sorry. You can't park there," the woman said, gesturing toward the driveway as if Elena had parked a tank on her lawn. "This is private property." "Yes," Elena said slowly. "My property." The woman's brows drew together. "That's impossible. The HOA hasn't approved any new homeowners. I closed on this house 2 days ago," Elena said, setting the box gently on the porch. "The title transfer should be on record." The woman snorted. "The board hasn't received notification, which means your paperwork is invalid. Until we verify it, you're trespassing." Elena regarded her for a long moment. There was a certain type of person she had seen many times in her courtroom, someone who mistook authority for power. She recognized that look in the woman's eyes now. "I'm sorry," Elena said again, her tone calm but firmer. "But I have every legal right to be here. Perhaps your office just hasn't caught up with the county's filings." "Don't get snippy with me," the woman snapped. "I'm Marjorie Fields, president of the HOA, and we enforce the rules here. That includes verifying residents. Now, please remove your vehicle before I call security." Elena tilted her head, studying her. "You're welcome to call whomever you like." Marjorie huffed, turning to one of her lackeys. "Jim, take photos, document everything. We'll add it to the report." The man obediently lifted his phone, snapping pictures of Elena's car, her porch, even her face. Elena sighed, her patience thinning. "I'd appreciate it if you didn't photograph me without my consent." Jim froze mid-click. Marjorie, do it," Marjorie barked. Then, pulling out her own phone, she began dialing. "Yes, I'd like to report a trespasser on private property. She's refusing to leave. Yes, 412 Sycamore Lane." Elena crossed her arms and waited. When Marjorie hung up, she looked triumphant, like a cat who'd cornered a mouse. "The sheriff's on the way. We'll see what he thinks about your so-called ownership." Elena didn't flinch. "Good, I'll be happy to clear this up." Marjorie smirked. "You'll be lucky if you're not in handcuffs by sunset." The absurdity of the statement nearly made Elena laugh. But she knew better than to engage. Instead, she leaned against her car, and watched the three self-appointed guardians of suburban order whisper among themselves. It took 10 minutes for the sheriff's deputy to arrive, a young man in tan uniform, sunglasses, and an expression of wary confusion as he stepped out of his patrol car. His gaze moved from Marjorie to Alina, then back again. "Afternoon," he said carefully. "What seems to be the issue?" Marjorie launched into her tirade before Alina could speak. "This woman is trespassing on HOA property. She claims to own this house, but the board has no record of any approved sale. She's been defiant, refused to move her vehicle, and verbally hostile." Alina raised an eyebrow. "Hostile, confrontational," Marjorie amended, clearly enjoying the sound of official words rolling off her tongue. The deputy nodded slowly, then turned to Alina. "Ma'am, can I see some ID and maybe proof of ownership? Just so we can clear this up." "Of course," Alina said. She reached into her bag and handed over her driver's license and a copy of the deed packet. The deputy glanced at the name, then froze. His posture shifted instantly. "Judge Reyes," he said, his voice lower now, "from county court." Alina smiled mildly. "That's right." Marjorie blinked. "Judge." The deputy scratched the back of his neck, clearly uncomfortable. "Ma'am, there's been some misunderstanding. Judge Reyes is well. She's definitely the homeowner if she says so. I've seen her in court more times than I can count." Marjorie's mouth opened, then closed again. But we didn't approve, Marjorie." The deputy interrupted gently. "Ownership's determined by the county, not the HOA. You might want to double-check your bylaws before making these calls." Alina's tone stayed calm, though her eyes gleamed with quiet amusement. "No harm done, deputy. I understand these things happen." The deputy nodded, gave Marjorie a look that clearly said good luck with this, and returned to his car. Marjorie, on the other hand, was fuming. "You think just because you're some judge you can bypass our rules." "No," Alina said evenly, picking up her box again. "I think because I understand the law, I don't need your permission to live in a home I legally purchased." Marjorie's cheeks flushed red. "We'll see about that." Alina met her eyes for a long, silent moment. There was no anger in her face, just a calm that made Marjorie falter. Then Alina smiled, the kind of smile that in court usually preceded a verdict no one wanted to hear. "Yes," she said softly, "we will." Marjorie's confidence faltered, but she lifted her chin defiantly. "You'll be hearing from the HOA." Alina chuckled as she carried her box through the front door. "I'm counting on it." Behind her, Marjorie muttered something about respect for authority, unaware that the woman she'd just tried to have arrested was the very person with the power to dissolve her entire board with a single stroke of a pen. Inside, Alina set her box on the kitchen counter, glanced out the window at the flustered trio still arguing in the driveway, and allowed herself a small, amused sigh. The morning of the hearing began quietly enough. A thin mist clung to the courthouse steps, softening the edges of the gray stone building as the clock tower struck 9. Inside, the hum of anticipation filled the air. Lawyers adjusting files, clerks whispering, the faint squeak of polished shoes on marble floors. In courtroom 3B, a cluster of people occupied the front benches. Marjorie Fields sat at the center of them, her lemon-yellow blouse replaced by a stiff navy suit that seemed to have been ironed by sheer force of will. On either side sat Jim and the other HOA board member, both looking far less confident than they had 2 weeks earlier. They whispered in nervous tones, shuffling papers they didn't seem to understand. "I told you this was a bad idea," Jim muttered. "We could have just apologized." Marjorie hissed back, "Apologized to her? She was trespassing. She undermined our authority. The HOA can't lose face." Jim rubbed his temples. "The HOA is 3 people and a clipboard, Marjorie. Maybe, just maybe, we should let this go. Marjorie didn't respond. Her gaze was fixed on the double doors at the front of the room. She was determined to prove she was right, even if she didn't quite understand what she was walking into. The bailiff entered first. "All rise," he announced, voice echoing through the room. Everyone stood. The doors opened, and Judge Elena Reyes walked in, robes flowing, calm and composed as ever. For a single, breathless moment, Marjorie's mind refused to make sense of what she was seeing. The same woman she had accused of trespassing now stood before her behind the bench, elevated, commanding, unmistakable in her authority. Elena settled into her seat, glancing briefly at the file before her. "Please be seated." The room obeyed. Marjorie swallowed hard, but her pride forced her to straighten her posture. "Your Honor," she began, her voice trembling only slightly, I believe there's been some mistake. We're here for a trespassing case." Elena looked up, eyes steady. "Yes, Ms. Fields, I see that." She flipped through the paperwork deliberately, the sound of turning pages echoing in the tense silence. According to this filing, the Sycamore Estates Homeowners Association has brought charges of trespassing and noncompliance against Ms. Elena Reyes. The courtroom went so quiet that the hum of the overhead lights became audible. Elena looked up again, her expression unreadable. "That name seems familiar." Marjorie's mouth opened, but no words came out. She stared at the judge, face draining of color. "Wait, this can't be." "I assure you it is," Elena said evenly. "Now, before we proceed, I must note that this filing contains several procedural errors. For one, an HOA cannot press criminal charges independently without police cooperation. Second, your evidence packet includes photographs taken without the subject's consent, which is a separate legal concern. And third, she leaned forward slightly, her voice calm but laced with authority. You accused a sitting county judge of trespassing on her own property." A nervous laugh rippled through the back of the courtroom. Jim looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. Marjorie's composure cracked. We didn't know, Your Honor. If you had known I was a judge." Elena interrupted. "You wouldn't have made the accusation, but you did because you believed your authority outweighed common sense and the law." She paused, letting the words sink in. "That's what concerns me." Marjorie sat frozen, her clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield. Elena continued, out of professional courtesy, "I recused myself from reviewing the criminal complaint. The district attorney's office dismissed it within 48 hours. However, I did request an independent audit of the Sycamore Estates HOA operations." She reached for a folder beside her and opened it. The stack of papers inside was thick, dozens of pages clipped together, each bearing a colored tab. Marjorie's eyes darted toward it. "Audit? Yes," Elena said, her tone now colder. "I found some interesting details: unauthorized fines, selective enforcement of landscaping rules, illegal late fees, and quite a few complaints from residents about harassment and discrimination." The words hit like blows. Jim's jaw dropped. The other board member leaned back in his chair, whispering, "We're dead." Marjorie sputtered, That's a misunderstanding. Those fees were approved by whom?" Elena asked sharply. Marjorie faltered, "By the board, which, as of last month, failed to renew its registration with the state," Elena said smoothly. "Meaning your authority to collect or enforce any rules has been void for 30 days. Every action you've taken since then, including the so-called trespassing report, is legally invalid." The room seemed to shrink around Marjorie. Her throat went dry, her clipboard now trembling in her hands. Elena went on, her tone calm but merciless. "I also noted discrepancies in your financial statements. Thousands of dollars in administrative fees transferred to a private account under your name." Marjorie's lips parted. I can explain. I'm sure you can." Elena said, setting the folder down, to the state attorney's office. I've already referred the matter for review. A murmur rippled through the room. The board members beside Marjorie turned on her, whispering furiously. Elena lifted the gavel, her expression steady, her voice soft but clear. Now, as for this courtroom's purpose today, given the HOA misconduct, unlawful fee collection, and failure to maintain proper registration, I am granting a motion to dissolve the Sycamore Estate Homeowners Association pending investigation. Marjorie's jaw dropped. You can't do that. Elena's eyes met hers, calm as still water. Oh, I can, and I just did. The gavel struck the block, one sharp crack that echoed off the walls. Marjorie slumped back in her chair, stunned. Jim exhaled in relief, muttering, finally. The other board member just stared at the floor, shaking his head. Elena rose from her seat, closing the folder with deliberate care. This community deserves leadership that understands the difference between authority and arrogance. Perhaps this will serve as a reminder that power must always answer to law. She gathered her notes, preparing to leave, but as she reached the door, she paused and turned back toward Marjorie. "Ms. Fields?" she said gently, almost kindly. "I don't hold grudges, but I do believe in accountability. Next time, before calling the sheriff, perhaps take a moment to make sure you're standing on the right side of the law." Marjorie's face burned crimson. "Yes, Your Honor," she whispered. Elena offered the faintest smile. "Good, court adjourned." She stepped through the doorway, her robe swaying behind her, leaving Marjorie and her defeated board in stunned silence. Outside, sunlight spilled across the courthouse steps. Elena took a deep breath, feeling the cool air against her skin. Somewhere down the street, a church bell chimed the hour. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A text from her new neighbor, Mr. Lyle, who had witnessed the entire HOA debacle weeks earlier. "Heard about what happened in court. Drinks at my place tonight. To celebrate freedom from the clipboard queen." Elena smiled to herself and typed back, "Wouldn't miss it." She looked up at the bright sky, her reflection shimmering faintly in the courthouse glass. Peace, it seemed, wasn't about escaping conflict. It was about facing it on your own terms. As she walked toward her car, she caught sight of Marjorie standing on the courthouse steps, shoulders slumped, papers clutched limply in her hands. For a moment, Elena almost felt sorry for her, almost. Then she slipped into her car, started the engine, and drove home, back to the quiet cul-de-sac where, for the first time since moving in, no one would dare question her right to be there. "Welcome to the neighborhood, Judge Reyes,"